Hello and welcome to Performance Interaction. Performance Interaction is a project to promote performance artists and performance art. I'm joined here today by John Huntington. John, you're very welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. So, John, we're going to talk about three works. And the first work that we're going to talk about is the new Gothenburg Spirit. And you performed this at the opening of the Gothenburg Konsthall's exhibition, I Imagine a Home in 2023.
That's right. That's right.
Yes. Could you talk a little bit about your thought process in designing that performance?
Yes, as I've been working for many years, almost decades now, I would say, with bureaucracy and administration within my practice. When I was invited to do this work for this anniversary of the Konsthall in Gothenburg, I was focusing on the backsides, you might say. What's happening behind the scenes of an administration like this? It's run by the municipality. It was a kind of an exorcism of some of the practices, of administrative practices that many people are caught up in. And in this work, it's both the people working at the art institution, but also in the municipality in general. So for this work, I both investigated what kind of procedures was happening, what kind of documents, what kind of bureaucratic weirdnesses was going on behind the scenes, and I wrote the script, and I made like costumes from discarded paper from the recycling bin and cardboard from the trash room. So somehow I was trying to look what happens behind the scenes of this institution and how to somehow help them exercise what they don't need anymore.
Yes, I noticed the outfits that you had made for the participants to wear and yourself. And I was interested in the text because you have all these pleats and folds, and it's very reminiscent of a kind of like a witch trial outfit. And it was really interesting. So it's really nice that it had a direct relationship to what you were thinking about, within that performance. And I noticed on the boxes, the kind of computerized, it was a really nice touch to have the handmade referencing the digital era that we're living in. And, you did you hand print those yourself?
It's a lot of small aspects in it. This the symbol on the cardboard box that the participants wore over their heads was actually a enlarged doodle from the director of the. She was during a meeting. I saw that she was scribbling, like just doodling on a paper, like drawing a little bit when she was, thinking about something else. And then after the meeting, I stole this piece of paper and used this as a kind of part of my ritual, also as a kind of example of what's going on between the lines somehow. Yeah.
Mm, that's really interesting. I love that. I love that idea that you stole her doodle and then it's like a digital screen. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
really good. So the live voice element that you are saying within that, and in English it means document handling, account number, and then project meeting. And so you're really building, a sense of, the energy is rising within that performance. And you have a very preacher-like presence within that. Could you talk a little bit about that and how you chose those words?
Yeah. No, the previous before the work, I did this research. I interviewed the people working at the art hall or the art institution, and some of the things that they were talking about. There were a couple of like stories, which were one was linked to account number, like the these account numbers you have for internal billing of different kinds, which always, to some people, it creates some problems and it can be mistakes. And also with the project meeting, somebody was complaining about that they had so many meetings about everything all the time. So that was also something I picked up. And also like how they handle the paper, because they are working with art, like a very living substance. And but of course they have to always negotiate and be in contact with all of these documents and digital systems of different kinds. So it was a little bit of I built this mantra out of some of the powerful words that I need to use all the time, or like concepts. And then I use this as a mantra to somehow help to, I don't know, get out of it, or go somewhere else.
Dokumenthantering, kod och kod, projektmöte. Dokumenthantering, kod och kod, projektmöte.
Yeah, it was great. And also the sound element, the recorded sound element that was playing was also building, this kind of ominous sound that was playing. It was very, very, very exciting actually to watch. I'm sure it was wonderful to be there. And you were anointing the participants at one point with, I saw on the screenshot that you gave me, you had shredded the documents as part of the performance. But in the video recording that I watched, you're anointing the participants and you're anointing the onlookers as well with these shredded documents, which I thought this was wonderful.
Dokumenthantering, kod och kod, projektmöte. Dokumenthantering, kod och kod, projektmöte. Dokumenthantering, kod och kod, projektmöte.
Yeah, that was so each of the participants, the work began with researching the art institution, but then it also somehow was a commentary on the whole municipality, because everyone involved has similar, maybe you work with social issues in the municipality, you have the same kind of balance between these systems you work for and the kind of content which deals with the human beings. So all of the participants, they were from different parts of the municipality, working at the different branches of the municipality, and they were asked to bring one paper from their job. So I shredded it as part of the performance, and then it's also undergoes this transformation then from paper to some kind of material that I used for this last kind of anointment of or like exorcism, where we somehow try together to escape or transform into something else. Yeah.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. And it seemed that the participants really enjoyed being part of it too, because at one point they began holding hands and swaying, and it was really, really nice to watch. Had they any experience in performance before, or was this their first time to participate in something like this?
Hard to say. Most of them I never met before, which was part of the project, that I had this public announcement made through my own social medias, and that everyone working at the municipality was welcome to participate in this exorcism. And then 10 people, they agreed to participate. And so that, or oh yeah, two out of 10 I knew from before, but the other ones were new to me. So, which was very interesting. I didn't know what to expect. We met just like 1 hour before. I gave them some instructions. They got the costumes. We tried them out together. So it was very. It was, of course, they got like very clear instructions from me, but it was participatory in this way that they could then interpret it a little bit. They were instructed to move at a certain point, but exactly how they moved was a little bit up to them. So it was a bit of insecurity involved in how it would actually turn out, because I didn't know if any, I didn't know, don't know if they had any experience before, or I don't think so. I think they were just a bit brave municipal workers.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I'd say it was talked about in many, you know, this kind of had further reach afterwards because of the fact that they came from different parts, as you say, and worked in different offices. So actually the message that you were trying to communicate within that performance had would have had a lot, I would say, a lot of after effects after that. Did you get any feedback of their experience afterwards?
Um, from some, yes, that I met in other contexts after this, and of course, what I asked is like, did the exorcism work? How did your kind of work situation change in any way, like with through this performative transformation? And unfortunately, maybe they didn't experience very many changes, but maybe it's a starting step somehow, this ritual. So, but they were also happy to participate. I think they were very, I don't know, thrilled to be involved in something like this. And then some of the people have been involved in another project that I started after this, which is also involves office workers, but
Mm.
in another context. So they, I guess they were got some kind of what you say, yeah, they got some kind of interests, and so they want to continue in some kind of similar practices after that.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
So thank you, John. So the next work that we're going to talk about is The Dark Administrator. And the name of this work conjures up, you know, the idea of this dark administrator, you know, kind of getting, you know, off on the power that, you know, he holds or she holds within their position. And there were many different things that came up for me within this work. And maybe you could talk a little bit about how this work came about.
Yes, this work actually predates the other one. Um, it's a collage of different kind of angles, you might say, which deals with this imagined position, the dark administrator, as something hidden, but not entirely negative. It's kind of a reimagining of some kind of position where you can have more agency as working within an administration. But it also has this balance on the verge of darkness, because if you make your own decisions within an administration, you can easily become corrupt, or it can become. So it's this position that I imagined, and then I have made many small pieces, you might say, that which builds up this work. It's many small building blocks around this imagined position, which I call the dark administrator.
Mm.
Um, so it began many. The original ideas are old. It actually began when I started collecting office stamps, which I also begin the work with talking about these office stamps that I'm collecting. And from this, I somehow have built this idea about this alternative position that can exist in society. And I also claim that this dark administrator may be needed at some points in, or my reimagined dark administrator, not the current dark administrators, maybe. But yeah.
Yeah, the table, you have all your stamp collection laid out quite beautifully. It's beautiful to see. It reminds me of kind of like a museum vitrine where you're looking in at all these gorgeous objects. You know, you're collecting them for many years. Can you remember when that started? What drew you to them?
I've been fascinated with kind of the how bureaucracy, how we interact with bureaucracy in different ways for a long time. and then these office stamps, which are not really in use very often these days, at least not in Sweden. It's very rare that you actually get documents physically stamped. It's all digital now. But so I have this double feeling. They are almost like a bit hostile. They are very like they are powerful tools that people, that authorities use. But then I also think that they're like physically cute and they're nice to hold, and you can also yeah, it's a fun object to interact with. So I had this doubleness towards them as objects. And then I had this idea already from the beginning to begin collecting them as an artwork. And when you do this as an artwork, you can also indulge yourself. You can spend money on it. You can, I wouldn't do that if it was just for my own fun. But as an artist, you can, yeah, you can indulge yourself in this kind of, if you call it an artwork.
I think it leans very much into the human desire to make marks, and the pleasure of pressing a stamp and then making the mark. But then also, as you say, there is a weight to these objects because they would have had real consequences in people's lives. So, if you have somebody who's in a position of power and the decision is going unchecked, where they get to make the decision whether it can be life altering maybe for somebody, maybe if they get a house or if they get a loan or if they get a car or, different things. So really, it kind of also speaks to me of what's happening now digitally as well with AI systems. And, this is maybe the new dark administrator, these unchecked systems that are happening currently. Were you thinking anything about the new systems, or is this something that you're looking at in relation to AI within your work at the moment?
I'm not in relation to AI. I am still trying to understand how to grasp your head of how to engage artistically with it, not as artistic tools, but to somehow how is because it's so new. But in relation to digital systems, more general, of course, this is very present in my practice because as these kind of interfaces between the state and the individual and this kind of bureaucratic administrative tools are super inspiring to me in different ways. But in relation to AI, it's hard because uh, it's so dead somehow. You can see something that's supposed to look alive in AI, but it's dead. So of course it has this similarities to other kind of systems that try to be alive. You're meeting different people like an office clerk or systems that are made up by humans, but also are very robotic in how these humans can interact. Of course, this has similarities to AI in different ways because it tries to look alive, but it's dead. And you can feel it, but you can't always see it, which is very weird, this kind of this feeling that it creates.
Yes. I was really interested, as part of that piece, you looked at real stories of people who had found different ways to kind of circumnavigate the systems that they were in. And, one was a Spanish administrator who literally was not turning up to work at all as his form of resistance.
Joaquin Garcia, a Spanish civil servant, was about to be rewarded after 20 years of loyal service to the local authorities in the southern Spanish city of Cadiz. However, there was a problem. The long and loyal service was perhaps not as long or as loyal as one first had thought, because Joaquin had actually not been at work for the past 6 years.
And there is a kind of a humor, but also a very serious aspect within your work. Could you maybe talk a little bit about how you kind of find that balance between the humor and talking about really, really serious human concerns?
Yeah, this is always the tricky balance to that you have to think about. Usually think about it as absurdity more than humor, because then I can. Uh, of course, when you get an idea, you are filled up with this idea because you think it's fun. Oh, if I have this angle or if I twist it like this, it's going to be both fun, but it's also something new, like artistically new.
Mm.
But then, of course, I want this balance that people are maybe laughing at some point, but the next second they will, oh, wait, were I supposed to laugh? Or now it's not funny anymore. Now it's about something real, but or everything's real, but some examples are like weird and funny, and some are like more serious. So I love this balance somehow. And in different works, of course, sometimes you fail and maybe you fall into the I don't know, more fun, too fun maybe for my, and sometimes it's like only serious.
Mm.
For me, I want this balance to work so that you are not really sure what you are supposed to feel. And if you are able to find yourself on this balance, I think that it's more this ambiguity towards the work. But that's always tricky somehow when you build up a work. And if you have like a durational work, it can be like funny first, and then it can be very serious, and then it can be funny. It's you can
Yes.
also build it up like more like dramatically. And not that I'm an expert in drama, but that's how. Yeah.
Mm. And it was really interesting. You went from different. There was a really nice build also within that work. You went from the seated position, then you were talking about different things, and then you were laying out this material, this green material on the ground. I just noted that the salt was an element here, this
Oh.
kind of cleansing. And then also in your creation of the pentacle with the stamps, it was very beautifully done. It was very meticulous. And the same when you're using the salt, there's a real skill in your care in creating. It came across really beautifully. I'm just wondering, with the salt, are you coming up with these designs beforehand? Is it in relation to what you are looking at within the symbols of the offices or the people you're interacting with? Or are these kind of hybrids of an amalgamation of both your own imagination and maybe symbols that you're coming across?
In this particular example, it's good to explain it into an international kind of context because the symbol I used in Sweden, it was the symbol of the Swedish Social Insurance Agency, which I'm also talking about a bit about in the work, like how, which is one of the large institutions that, are both enabling people to get money, but they are the gatekeepers of money for people in need, usually. So they have a tricky position, but people are also having a tricky position interacting with them. So I use this symbol as a kind of clear symbol that not maybe not all Swedish people recognize it, but most people like recognize this symbol. I would say adults. When I did the work in Denmark, I switched the symbol to that the current audience, and then I used the crown, which they used the crown in the Danish design of the royal crown in many of their institutions. So I adapt the work to the context. I only performed it in Sweden and Denmark so far. So.
Mm.
And then, of course, I used the salt as a kind of the cleansing, and this also traditional used in this kind of rituals where you um, uh, also taking back power somehow from this, or cleansing yourself from their influence, maybe. Yeah.
Yes, and also kind of a kind of protection too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And within this work, you have different sections where you are showing images of offices without people. And I found this very interesting. And you have some death metal playing while this is happening as well. These are kind of soulless spaces without the human presence. Were these images that you took yourself, or where did you source these images?
No, first to mention, I want to mention that I collaborated with this musician, Jon Ekström, which is he's doing a lot of different things, but he has this death metal project, which I was loved to collaborate with. This was our first collaboration. We continued collaborating afterwards. So it was also partly built up around with the music, because he made new music for the work while I was working on the work. So this with the empty offices, it was actually something that I came up with when I heard some of the music that he wrote for the work. And then I had this idea for this kind of ghostly, eerie feeling that you get from empty spaces where people should be, but there are none there. And or maybe people left, maybe this kind of what happened after the catastrophe. I had got this kind of inspiration. So, and then I sourced them from the internet. I didn't take them myself actually, because I needed that a very many large amount of photos of empty offices from different places. So they are different Creative Commons pictures I found online. So it's kind of simple that way.
That's great. Just in relation to that work, you were making these paper talisman little figurines, and I found that quite interesting. And you were making a different figurine a day, because you wanted to make sure they were, not getting grubby in the office, and also you spoke about using a drop of your blood to activate these little talisman men or women, or they also had a very kind of comic element to them, because some of the shapes that came out of your making process reminded me of almost like a Scooby-Doo monster figure. I don't know if you know Scooby-Doo, but yeah.
Yeah.
But then also it kind of leans into, for me, that very human desire for protection and these little odd things that we all do, to keep ourselves safe in many different ways. It's kind of yeah. And how did that come about? How did that begin?
Yeah, the project with the small paper figurines, I had, at the time I was working myself at the municipality, part-time job to support my art practice. I worked with the procurement of public art. So it's a very bureaucratic procedure for how public art come about. So I made them as kind of protection for myself, to protect myself from some of the influences. Like didn't want to be drawn into the bureaucratic too much. I had this tendency to organize stuff. I like organizing stuff, so I didn't want to, getting too deep. So I begin making them from discarded paper from the recycling bin at my work. I don't work there anymore, but so that's how they come about, as like protection for myself. But then, of course, it becomes kind of an encouragement for everyone to invent their own protective practices. You can take whatever you have around and somehow, how can I think about what I'm actually doing? It's also kind of a distancing yourself a little bit towards yourself. So creating a little bit of a zone for reflection somehow, when doing this. And then of course I also to not have them become yeah, I needed this drop of blood, one drop of my own blood on each of one of them for them to somehow a little bit of a sacrifice from my side, so that it actually cost me a little bit. It was not only fun and playful, it had this little ingredient of sacrifice too. And then the shapes, it was also, I made one for each day I was physically at work. And after a while, I had to, make them in different ways. So they had this different looks after, so that I didn't want all of them to look the same. I had to. And then after a while, of course, when you begin, you have some idea that they can look whatever. And then, of course, your aesthetic sense comes in and you want them to look good also. That was not the point, but after a while, this also becomes something that you think about at least.
And did this spread in the office you were working in? Like, were people interested? Were they talking to you about them? Were they saying,
No, that was the interesting thing. I put up one. I only had one at the point at each time, so it was only one little figure standing on next to my computer. I don't think that people, while I was doing it, actually thought about it at all. That it was a different one each day. They only thought that it was one, and I'd never got a question about it while I was working there. But then, of course, I made this performance piece with them involved, and then of course people knew afterwards because some of my colleagues came to see the performance where I described what they actually were, but none knew before. But then it's like some stuff you do. I published some story about this project online, and then I suddenly got random people sending me pictures of their own little paper things that they made, just being inspired without me asking anyone to interact with this project. People interacted anyway, it was truly lovely.
That's wonderful. So, John, within that work, you incorporated the painted faces of some people who work in administration. And there again, these faces have certain symbols. Were these also symbols in relation to administration, or, how did you come up with the symbols for each different person?
They are taken from the logotypes of their workplaces, their institution that they work for. So I took elements, like sometimes only small elements, and sometimes maybe almost the whole logotype. It depends on the layout of the actual logotype. And I incorporated them and remixed them into these face paintings. So these people, they are working at these places. For the example, I have one person working for the social insurance agency that I did this face painting on, and then this face painting is then it's then the standardized. After I've done it once, it becomes the standardized face painting for this institution. So it's a kind of a prototype that I encourage everyone that works there to wear if they want to. I don't know if anyone actually have done it, except for this situation where I did the face painting. But it's a kind of something that I want them to wear, and so it's basically these logotypes that are incorporated.
So moving on to the third work, there are 8 photographs in this work. What was the title of this project where you're working, doing a participatory dialogue with these people in this photographic project?
It's institutional corpse paint, the title. So it also has a slightly different double meaning in Swedish, because corpse is called lik in Swedish, which is also lik is to be the same. So it's a corpse, which, yeah, if you're dead, you're more the same than if you're alive. So I'm using this black metal corpse paint tradition, and I'm mixing it up with this bureaucratic symbols that the logotypes of these workplaces. So in this work, I also made this public announcement for people. Do you work in administration? Do you want to come to my studio and be part of my project and do a face painting? So I got in contact with a lot of interesting people that I never met before. And it becomes this participatory work in the sense that they come to the studio, we talk a little bit about how their workplace is, what their problems are. It becomes a little bit therapeutical in this work. But this is not recorded. This situation that when I meet them, it's for us. And the result of these photographs, these portrait photographs of them in these face paintings.
Mm. And so within that interaction, I mean, it's really interesting. I love the idea that you're doing a call, a public call, and you've no control over what type of people respond or who turns up. And so you're getting these interesting interactions with strangers, basically, that, and then building a relationship within that moment of, sharing information. Did you make any notes in relation to some of the information that they shared with you? Were the conversations around their experience within working in office structures? Or, I know myself from sometimes interviewing people, you could be talking about something 1 minute and then they can go into like a whole personal conversation of, because there's this bond of trust that can sometimes be instantaneously built within one-to-one situations. Did you experience anything like that?
Now, the conversations was definitely very, very interesting, and they can, of course, all change, and you don't know what you will talk about. I didn't record them in detail, no, but they become part of this larger research, or like my whole practice is through these projects, which can be playful sometimes, or they can be more serious sometimes. I get this kind of very loose network of people working in different places around Sweden that I learn very much from. I've been working some in administration myself, but of course not to the extent of these people that I'm interacting with. So I'm getting slowly like building up this kind of bank of knowledge and anecdotes, but maybe not in this concrete way that I recorded what specific people said in this situation.
Mm.
So, but also the kind of insecurities that they have involving with an art project is also super interesting because it's a lot about trust. Some of them came to my studio themselves, had no one with them, never met me before, and are going to participate, in very kind of intimate situation, being, you have to be very close to paint, detailed face painting. And they are very somehow. So I love this kind of insecurity in the process. You don't know who will participate, what will happen when you meet them. So this is something that I think you put specifically these people, they put something on the line in involving themselves in this project. And also many of them actually, they said yes first. And then they said like, oh, maybe I have to ask my boss for permission, because I'm now representing the institution here. And then this kind of question that I think 3 out of these 8 people actually asked their HR representative or their boss for permission to participate in my art practice. And this actual question is something also part of the project, I think, that somebody working at maybe a state institution somewhere in Sweden goes to their boss and try to explain this art project to them without me present. I think it's very somehow how things like this can spread in ways you can't foresee.
That's really interesting. And it also kind of leans into the idea of this control that if you're working for some structure, as you say, like a state body or something like that, this idea of your behavior, what can you do if it references somewhere where you're working. So that's really interesting that they felt that they needed to, you know, disclose that they were working, and was it okay, like gaining permission, getting permission.
Yeah.
It seems,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, that's wonderful. So thank you very much, John. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, and
Yeah.
I really appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Thank you.